And welcome to all of you streaming in across the internet. We are live streaming now, the Political Trade Secrets show, and so here in a few minutes, as people are coming in, we will start with the actual program. But thank you for joining us, and thank you to everybody who's following us on social media, whether it's Facebook, X, LinkedIn, wherever you're at. Thank you for following us there, so that you can get these kind of conversations. You can join the conversation if you join the live stream, and please do post comments, questions, and we'll try to bring those into the show. Also, we'd love for you to like, follow, and subscribe. And today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Aditi Bussells, former Columbia, South Carolina City Council member, Democrat strategist, and a public health expert. She's been on TV with me a couple of times. She's the Democrat, I'm the Republican, and we have usually have a few points of agreement and also disagreement. But this will be a fun conversation. We're also friends, and I think she did a lot of good work in her public service. And one of the things I think you should check out, we'll post this in the comments at some point, Thomas, if you can make sure we do that. But she had this interesting article. I'll ask her about this a few times, but the unsexy issues Democrats keep getting wrong. And she has a few different topics on there: the border, public safety, voter ID. We have the SAVE Act is being debated, and the U.S. Senate, and that's an important issue. Also, stock trading ban. So interesting, crossover issues that really, Democrats could win on if they embrace that. So you should check that out in the comments, and stay tuned for that conversation. Now, one of the things that I'm going to mention to her is I asked one of our previous guests, Kerry Cranford, who's a pollster. You should go check out his episode. He's also a Southern Democrat. He's based in South Carolina as well. And we work with him on lots of different projects around legal research, market research. He's really good at focus groups. Anyway, you should go back and listen to our conversation on Political Trade Secrets. Fascinating stories about old-time Southern politics. But he had a question for Aditi, which I will make sure to ask. I believe he was a supporter of her in her campaigns. Anyway, very fascinating. And then also, if you didn't see our last episode with Eric Wilson from the Center for Campaign Innovation, I'm also going to talk to her a little bit about that, because she's has some interesting thoughts on Mamdani and Trump and the similarities and the media fragmentation stuff that Eric and I talked about. I think it's a perfect tie-in. So I'll ask her about that. And then we have some U.S. Senate race polls that are going to be coming out soon. Do check them out. You go to pollingclub.com to get all that, and you can suggest questions, topics for our surveys. I know a lot of people on PredictIt, Kalshi, and places like that, prediction markets, they like joining the polling club because, hey, you might have a better bet and make a little more money if you actually have the inside scoop from our polling. And it's something we really do. Really, it's pretty fun to be able to just ask the public what you want to ask them. So please do check that out at pollingclub.com. We are just moments away from Political Trade Secrets and my conversation with Dr. Aditi Bussells, Democrat strategist, public health expert, and former Columbia, South Carolina City Council member. And here we go with Political Trade Secrets.
Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, here's your host, Dustin Olson.
Pollster and host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast, Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
Dustin Olson.
And Dustin Olson, pollster at American Pulse. They work for both Republicans and Democrats. And he hosts a podcast, Political Trade Secrets. Oh, we love that. We like that podcast.
Now, from Washington, D.C., is pollster Dustin Olson.
And welcome to Political Trade Secrets. I'm your host, Dustin Olson. It's great to have you here. We're going to have an excellent show for you today. We're going to be navigating Southern Democratic politics with our guest, Aditi Bussells, and really looking forward to that and learning from her experiences on city council and what she's doing in the media these days and learn a few more things. But if you like the show and you'd like to help us out and you'd like to know whenever we are either going live or when we have a new episode, you can like, follow, and subscribe on all of the podcast platforms, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Find us there. Also, if you follow us on any of our social media, when we do a live stream of these episodes and you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can follow us. Follow me on X at Dustin Olson on X is a great place to do that. But it really does make a difference. And one of the things I'm going to be asking our guest today, Aditi, is that one of the things we have going on right now is we're working on a new survey that we're going to be doing of America's political strategists on both the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats, and to see what they think is coming up in 2026 and 2028, what technologies are campaigns using, what are the issues that are going to decide what happens in these elections, and just where they see politics going. So that'll be one of the questions I ask our guest today, and really do appreciate a lot of people have been providing us input. And if you'd like to be part of surveys like that, and you'd like to get the inside scoop on what's happening with our polling, you can go to pollingclub.com and sign up to be part of our polling club community. And you can help us decide what questions we ask in our national polls and our state polls. You can help us decide where we should be doing polls. We're doing a lot of polling right now in U.S. Senate races, in state polls across the country. And one of the things is a lot of you I know are fans of Kalshi and Predict It and other prediction markets, and you can actually know what's going on and make good bets if that's what you're into. So without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our guest. Aditi Bussells is a good friend and someone you may have seen me on TV with. She's a Democrat and I'm the Republican, and we can almost always find something to agree on, and I think you'll see that today. She's Dr. Aditi Bussells. She has a doctorate in public health from the University of South Carolina, and one of the most important things I think is that she's been a city council member in Columbia, South Carolina, and has worked on important issues around homelessness, around economic development, and helping that city to make a transition to be a vibrant city. She's has a background in public health, so she's a healthcare expert as well. And now she's out there speaking on television and other media as a Democratic strategist. So anyway, lots of interesting stuff that we can find out from Aditi. And without further ado, we'll move on with the show. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you are in an iconic location right now. For anybody in the Washington, D.C. area, they would recognize that as the terminal there at Reagan Airport. And so you're in our nation's capital, and I'm appreciative of you taking some time to be with us today and to have this conversation. Hopefully you have already made it through TSA.
I have, yes. It was actually quite seamless here, but maybe because they anticipate a lot of travel.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. So right now, as we speak and we record, that's a big issue going on in the country right now. Trying to get a portion of our government open. A lot of dysfunction. One of the other things that's going on is the SAVE Act is being debated in the U.S. Senate, and I actually something that's interesting. You wrote an article not too long ago, and you talked about kind of the unsexy issues that the Democrats keep getting wrong. And, I think voter ID is one of the issues that you actually talk about in that article. So what's your point of view on this whole issue?
Well, I think in general, just a very heightened sense of disagreement has been pretty common with everything that's going on. And sorry, I'm in an airport.
No worries. That's
there may be, so as you and I both have toddlers, so you get it. But I think one of the issues that I talked about in that piece was instead of us fighting on whether or not you need an ID to vote, which seems like a very common sense rule when you think about all of the things that you need to have an ID for, so we should maybe be focused more on making those IDs as accessible to people that may not have access to them. So looking at things like a ID van or service that can go out to some of our rural areas and provide those. Having some kind of fund or allocation for those who may not be able to afford an ID. And that way, you're kind of addressing what I think is really the real concern, the valid concern, which is making sure that those that are already in disadvantaged situations, whether they live in remote areas or live in poverty, have access to be able to exercise their power to vote. And unfortunately, it's become more caught up in just the politics of it all. But I think that is what you and I will probably agree on has become so dysfunctional and why we're not seeing a government that people trust in or want to engage with.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a lot of good points. This is the thing that I scratch my head at when you see folks, and primarily Democratic politicians who are against having voter ID, and it's to me to act like there are a lot of people anyway that are incapable of doing it. I think that's it's incredibly demeaning of those people because first of all, has anybody ever met somebody who doesn't have an ID? I'm guessing anybody who's watching right now has never met somebody. But if you do think that people can't get an ID, what you're proposing is exactly the right thing to do. Their first order of business isn't voting. Their first order of business is getting an ID so they can get on the airplane if they needed to, so they could, be able to get a bank account, to do very basic things to be able to live in this world. And the compassionate thing to do is to help these people who I think are fairly imaginary be able to get a voter ID or be able to get an ID of some sort to be able to live their lives, because in this day and age that's required for everything. So I think you get to the heart of the issue on that. And I know there's a few other issues. What are some of the other things that you think are the kind of the unsexy issues that the Democrats could be getting
Well,
better?
I think you're seeing this one happen a little bit, but I think we were always seen in the last, I think, couple of years as being anti-law enforcement. And when you look locally, and in my experience serving as city councilman, that was the number one issue,
Yeah,
whether it was in the context of homelessness or quality of life or gun violence. And I think that what Democrats get right is we recognize that the justice system is not working in
yeah,
terms of rehabilitating people so that they can reenter society and engage in a way that is meaningful. And there are probably policies in place that have unintended consequences for people that do want a better life and have done their time and they want to come out and be better. But I think that the message was co-opted by the super, super, super left when the defund the police movement happened. And since then, there's been this reluctance to embrace the fact that, yes, at its very core, a community must be safe in order for all of these other things that we want to come and be successful to be able to happen. And
yeah.
so I think that is something that we shouldn't shy away from when we're campaigning, is talking about safety, but talking about it in the context of all of these other things that we could be doing to improve programs to, again, lift people out of circumstances if they want to.
Yeah. Well, for me, when I think about messaging as a pollster and as a political strategist, I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and safety is at the top of that list. You need to have oxygen, you need to have food and water, and you need to have personal safety. These are the things that are shelter. These are the very basic things that people need. Whenever an issue gets into that territory where one of those basic needs is threatened, that has a really big motivating factor, and it'll transcend politics. Years ago, it's 2013. We did a recall election in Colorado, and it was around the Second Amendment. And what had happened is this district, the Senate president in Colorado, had passed a bunch of gun legislation that were pretty onerous, and his district happened to be a district that Barack Obama had carried with 65% of the vote, but also was the number one area for murders in the state. And a lot of people have bars on their windows, and the people in his district, who are mostly Democrats, they wanted to be able to protect their family, and they did not feel like the police were going to be there in time. So we removed him from office. He was actually recalled and was removed from office, and a wonderful man by the name of Bernie Herpin replaced him for a short period. It was a very Democrat district, and he got defeated in the re-election. But it is that was just very basic. People didn't care about the politics; they just cared about being safe, and that's what motivated folks. So that is something that I think there's an opportunity. I can't remember if it was a segment that you and I did where it was brought up about Hakeem Jeffries was talking about the basically the defund ICE as well. And my comment on that, because I think he did a good job of sidestepping that and trying to, the abolish ICE stuff, because that is so, like, if you look at the polling, those are so close to the defund the police. That is, that's the sort of thing that could be devastating to Democrats who are hoping to possibly win the House in this election. It's a thing to steer clear from, and it's definitely the radicals in the party. But that's another thing that I think you mentioned, that you talked about border security as well. Is something that's sense.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to something that you mentioned about the community that recalled their representative, about how they didn't care about politics, they just cared about their specific community. And I feel like that sentiment is very common across the country. But what's happening is mainstream media, coupled with the apparatus, whether it's the Democratic establishment or the good old boys of the GOP, right? They then weaponize anything that seems like it's out of line or out of step with what they believe is the party's values.
Yeah.
When the average human being, and I've always said this, the average human being probably has policy agreements with both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
And so what's happened now is, even when you see today, I was on TV today talking about Senator Mullins and Fetterman agreeing to move him forward. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you want effective leaders that do take stances and think critically about issues, even if it's not their party's choice per se, but then also expect that they're going to be constantly fighting.
Yeah.
You can't have, and so that's kind of this catch-22 that we're in. Is you do have some really promising, and I'd like to say young generation of leaders that want to step up, that do have their, eyes on the ground in terms of what everyday people want. But these larger apparatuses are making it very difficult for them to succeed and be true representatives, because you're either called a rhino or you're called a fake Democrat. Like it's just not set up for success. And I blame social media. I blame the polarization that the algorithm has caused, as well as just the general sentiment that this current administration has allowed to continue, and not to say that there isn't necessarily things that previous administrations did incorrectly, because there's plenty. But I think that I think we're just in a really, really sad place in terms of our politics.
Yeah, it's interesting. Our last episode, we talked about media fragmentation, which is ultimately what you're talking about here, and it has a real world impact on campaigns and who is going to be successful in campaigns. And it doesn't have to be all bad, but I would say that a lot of our politics, people want to blame the individuals. I would say don't hate the player, hate the game. It's the game has been set up, and it's mostly because of the algorithm. I do my personal belief is that is the number one driver of this situation, is that each of us have, with our phones, we have our own reality that's given to us. And even your spouse is getting a different reality than you are in the same household. It's remarkable. And then the same thing with something that's important in campaigns and media is what we call connected TV. So streaming, people get different ads based off of that, and on and on. Like, everything is being driven by some sort of algorithm. And as AI becomes even more powerful, we'll not even just have different content showing up where we watch things. We will be given completely differently constructed ads where the words are different, even the tone of the person speaking, it may be the same representation. They might look like the same person, but the way they speak is going to sound differently based on how people have figured you out. Not people, the AI has figured you out. And it's unfortunately probably something that's going to be amplified over time, which is why conversations like this, in my opinion, are important to
Very
actually
much so.
common ground. And I want to talk about your time in city government, because really what it seems to me is that you were looking for places where people from different walks of life could work together and solve issues like homelessness, like revitalization. You're from, I believe you're from Maryland originally, but you
Mhm.
served in Columbia, South Carolina, uh, an old southern city that probably had seen better days at one point, and is in what I've seen from being there a little bit is that there's an attempt to revitalize. What's been done with the downtown is quite remarkable. And then there's parts of the city that are still struggling, it seems to me. And there's a lot of issues. So, you know, first off, like, why did you even decide to run, and how did you actually first get into politics?
So I've always been politically engaged because it's something that I grew up around. My grandfather was a freedom fighter during the British kind of revolution in India. It's something that has always been important to my family, immigrating here and kind of, really believing in the American dream and the promise of America. And I know that sounds cliche, but it's very true, right? Like my parents came here and they believed that this was going to be the place that they're going to build a family and build a legacy. And I think that they've done just that. But I think some of it was luck, some of it was timing. And I think, 6 or 7 years into being in Colombia. I had just finished my PhD and was working in the child welfare system.
Hmm.
Alongside that, of course, the pandemic happened. And I started to see just a lot of concepts that I had studied my whole life entering mainstream in terms of people trying to understand, what does it mean when we talk about disparities? What does prevalence versus incidence mean? And I was in a unique position because I did not work for the state government. I worked in a quasi state government. So we had an arm that was 501(c). So I was able to contribute to the discourse, whether it was through op eds or social media, to help people understand this is why this is happening. This is what a pandemic is. And I think that inadvertently built me a platform. And
Yeah.
I remember kind of the turning point moment for me was when a sitting congressman called me and he said, "Hey, I got your number from so and so. I don't know what I think about schools being closed, and I want to know what you think, Doc." And I think I realized in that moment that, I'm 30 years old and a sitting congressperson's asking for my opinion and my advice and guidance in terms of how he should stand on whether or not the school should be closed. And I
Wow.
think that's what's always been really special about Columbia and about South Carolina. Well, I definitely struggled in terms of finding my place when I first moved there, because Columbia specifically is very much all about whether or not you're born or raised there. And we can have a whole conversation about what I think that's coded for. But
Mhm.
I knew that this is where I needed to be. And my purpose and what drives me every day is being able to say that I made something better. And so I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that I wanted to stay. And so we pivoted our plans. We thought we were going to move, out west or something. And, Columbia is a small town, in that if you have a dream or an idea, you're probably 1 degree away from finding somebody who can help you. And so one of my first friends in Columbia was Hunter Wilson. And I've told this story many times.
Mhm.
He is the a brother of our current attorney general.
Yep.
And so he made some calls and said, "Hey, I really want you to meet with her. I think she is smart and we can get her plugged in." And I remember Alan coming to the coffee and saying, "I have 20 minutes. My brother asked me to do this and I'll talk with you." Well, those 20 minutes turned into 3 hours. And we had pretty passionate discourse about systemic racism, of all things, the concept.
Yeah.
And I didn't know him well, but he was like, "I'm just so impressed that you were willing to engage without getting, like, without shutting down." And he's like, "I learned something from this." And so I think that that's what's really cool. And that is the type of base or support or social circles I want to be in. I feel like I'm constantly learning because there are many angles to every issue. Now, in this day and age, the average voter may see that as like, "Oh, she's not Democrat enough." But the
Mhm.
reality is, what who you are as a Democrat in South Carolina is so different than, say, Maryland or DC, because
Totally.
generally Southern states are way more conservative in many ways. And so my neighbor ended up being my predecessor on council. She said she's not running for her seat. It was an open seat. And so I didn't even know how to hire a campaign manager, but hired an awesome one who and ended up running and was the top vote getter that cycle, and had a really unique base of independents, millennials that were voting for the first time in a local election, Democrats and conservatives. And I thought that that was really cool to see people come around a candidate because of who they were as a person, not because I had any sort of institutional backing. In fact, the first time I ran, I won against Congressman Clyburn's endorsement of my opponent.
Wow.
So I think that, it was a different time. And for people that are watching, I unfortunately did not win reelection. And I think a lot of that is also contributed to the national climate. And kind of what I said earlier is, do you actually want an effective leader, someone who thinks about issues and votes based on what they believe is right? Or do you want someone that is very much just focused on party politics? And I've always said that local is where you don't have to delve into that much. But I think with all of the national polarization, we saw that for the voters that came out, being a open Democrat that only stood for Democratic principles during the campaign, um, was what was important to them in the moment. And I respect that. But I think that that is very
That's
much
not
something
typical.
that I've enjoyed.
That's not typical in a city. Well, every city has their politics, and there's most cities are going to be, they're going to lean Democrat, and there's some cities in the country, not very many, but some that lean Republican, and pretty much those are the politics, and it's one way or the other. But I assume there's factions within that, and there probably always has been factions within it, which is why I'm curious about the kind of the navigating of all that. But to go back to Hunter, I knew Hunter when he was a kid in college, and I know my wife, and met my wife because of his dad, and yelling "You
What a
lie"
small world.
at Barack
So
Obama.
Hunter's great. He
Yeah.
his one of his best friends was a roommate of Lewis, my husband, in Citadel. So it's just a very small world here in South Carolina.
Wow.
And I'm always going to be grateful to him for opening doors and encouraging me to stay, especially when I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay. And I'm really glad that I did, because we've built a really beautiful life here.
That's awesome. Well, that's the great thing. Also, I would say about Columbia in general, there's a real group of younger people in the community who all are work together. It goes across party lines, and people who just kind of work together. They care about their community, and they want the community to be stronger. And that's something that's unique. Actually, I've worked in almost every state, if not every state, and I've before. So that campaign where I worked for his dad was my last real campaign as a vagabond campaign manager going entry, because I met my future wife, and that wasn't going to work anymore. But at that point, I lived in like half of the states. I will say that this is not something you see in most communities across the country, where you have a lot of young people who are, you know, out to do big things. They're working on their professions. They all kind of help each other. And you mentioned something about in some of the old South not being as welcoming for people. Um, I felt that a little bit, being someone who came in from, I was, a guy from Colorado doing a campaign, and um, you feel that a little bit. But I do think that's a little bit different with the younger people, in
Oh, very much so.
and
I
as far as
think,
why you could be elected.
yeah, I think they were very welcoming. But I would say that, surprisingly, and maybe because I had rose colored glasses on, if I paint you a picture of while I was running, you had in Maryland, our now Governor Wes Moore running alongside an Indian American woman, Arna Miller.
Mhm,
So I grew up in a very multicultural society because there were a lot of Latinos and Asians and people beyond just a very white and black landscape.
mhm,
When I moved to the South, people didn't know what to do with me. And in some ways, the first thing that they would associate me with, maybe it was because it used to annoy me, but now I realize, like, this might have been their only other example. It would be Nikki Haley,
yeah.
because that was the only other person they could think of that had this kind of similar heritage and similar kind of upbringing, but didn't fit into spaces. And so there, that combined with just the general, I think this is how it's always been, that you have to be born and raised here to serve here,
Yeah.
especially on the city level, really surprised me in terms of people in my own party being very dismissive and saying things like, this seat was never made for her. She's not one of us. She's not from here. And when you think about my background as an immigrant, my name is Aditi,
Mhm.
right? Like, I'm never going to be from here,
Yeah.
ever. Like, my
Yeah.
name will always be foreign. I always will look different. And so to continue to point that out, it was just interesting, because typically Democrats blame Republicans for kind of those dog whistles. But I felt in the moment that that's what was happening to me, is pushing me into being quote unquote other and
Yeah.
making people feel um, doubtful about who I was and what I stood for.
Yeah, well, having worked in South Carolina politics, I will say that that is not something that I've seen on the Republican side. Um, and I probably have seen it on the Democrat side quite a bit. For Republican groups, if you show up and you have a different background, they're super excited. Like, oh my gosh, there's somebody who
Maybe. I mean, I
probably
disagree with you there because I do feel that this past cycle, there was some dark money mailer that went out of me standing next to Bernie Sanders and Mamdani. And again, really don't have anything in common with them politically, but
interesting.
it did what it needed to do, which was that there were a lot of very, I think, evangelical conservatives
Huh.
that were worried that I
That's
was
a different
Muslim
thing.
and I was going to bring, yeah.
That has nothing to do with racial politics. That has to do with both of those guys are socialists. That's
Yeah,
the,
but I think they were worried about like the religious aspect of that, and
well,
assuming that because I
possibly.
was brown, I would be, Muslim.
Yeah, that possibly. I mean, with Zoran Mamdani, that's definitely that we did a lot of polling in the New York City mayor's race, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that topic in a moment. But it is obviously Israeli politics and that issue became a big thing, and it was interesting as we tested that in New York City. So his specific policies have changed that conversation somewhat. But Bernie Sanders obviously is he's just an old white guy who's a socialist. So I would assume that's partly what was going on there, but I have no idea, and I have no idea why somebody would have done that because that doesn't seem to be in their interest. They just got another I think they wouldn't have gotten what they wanted from having done that. So this is the tough thing though about the politics. I'm sorry that you went through that because there's some of that stuff seems very underhanded and dirty pool and and not good representation. But from my own experience with well, I think there's a very vibrant Indian community in particular in South Carolina, and Nikki Haley is a good example of that. And people who have built, wonderful businesses, and that's one of the things that I noticed having, done campaigns there. It's, pretty remarkable what
Yeah.
some people have done in short generations. And I actually would like to go back because I'd like to hear more about your grandfather. I'm sure the audience would too. Like what? So that would have probably been is that the 30s and 40s time frame?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah.
About your grandfather.
I mean, he was, always deeply involved in politics and the liberation of India.
Mhm.
And he dedicated his life to doing that. He was an activist and someone who would rather fight for his country than make a lot of money. So I always respected that he was willing to sacrifice a lot of that to make sure that India got the independence that it wanted. And I actually didn't learn about that until later in life. My dad, he came here after studying under street lamps because they didn't have electricity all the time.
Mm.
And now he's a very successful cancer researcher at the National Cancer Institute and has patented to early detection biomarkers on behalf of the National Institutes of
Wow.
Health. That wouldn't have happened anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
And so I always think about like certain things are innate. And so when people are like, did you always know you were going to be in politics? No, but I also knew that it was a gift that I had that I can take really complicated concepts and make them easy for people to understand. Or, one of my colleagues in council used to joke, he used to be like, you just have that magic touch with those old white men. They listen to you, even if they're grumpy. And it's because I think I am able to communicate with a very diverse group of people
Yeah.
and find something to bring them in, even if I don't agree with a single thing that they're saying. At least we can connect on a human level. And I think that that's a very unique skill that I attribute to my family and attribute to my grandfather, who, he worked alongside Hindus, Muslims, anyone that believed that they were Indian. He was ready to fight alongside them to make sure that India got the freedom that it
Where in
deserved.
India was he from?
We are from Varanasi or Banaras, which is the holy city, and has a lot of history in terms of both kind of religious and in terms of political history as well. It's in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is translated as the upper state. And Uttar Pradesh is the largest state, and it is home to Delhi and a lot of the kind of political movements that you see on the news.
Yeah. Occasionally I get to do CNN India, and
Oh,
that's,
cool.
if you haven't done it, it's
I
fun.
have not. Bring
You
me
should
along next
Yeah,
time.
you should ask about it. It's a good time. They have a voracious appetite for American politics, which I think is interesting.
And we can have a whole different conversation about how I see so many parallels within Indian and American politics right now.
Yeah. Well, what are some?
Well, I think that the MAGA movement is very similar to Modi's movement of Hindu nationalism.
Mhm.
And I think that many of the tactics that he has used, where he would say it's increasing pride, I think has also disenfranchised some of the Islamic community in India. And I think what people don't realize is India has one of the largest Muslim communities in the world.
Yeah.
And they stayed in India by choice, despite Bangladesh and Pakistan becoming independent countries. So it's really interesting to see how some of the same kind of, I think, jargon or lingo or kind of ways in which Modi approaches things. And I know he's a good friend of Trump. I don't know if they are anymore after the tariff stuff, but they
I'm sure.
were.
Right.
So yeah, they have the same kind of approach, which is very effective in some ways because it reaches the average voter very, very well. And I think that something that everybody should learn from Trump is his sense of humor and how he communicates. He's a real human being. And I think you and I talked about how, I was not surprised at all that Mamdani and Trump got along, even though they're very different in terms of their political kind of beliefs and policies, because they're real human beings and they're
Yeah.
funny and they're approachable and they're charismatic and um they're just people you want to know, right? And
Yeah.
and like that was the thing that I don't agree with Mamdani on a lot of the things that he's doing, but what I do agree is that he is someone I want to meet because he's an interesting person. I don't doubt that he's not smart, and that's the type of politician that I want to be, and that's the type of the folks that I would like to see enter politics, where they don't lose their authenticity in the process, which is so hard,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like politics has been kind of stagnant in terms of its communication, despite the world evolving so much. But when you have breakthroughs like that, and I'll give Trump his credit and Mamdani his credit, you see why voters gravitate to people like them.
Yeah. So this is the last episode was with Eric Wilson of the Center for Campaign Innovation, and this was one of the things that we talked about was media fragmentation in particular, and this is an example of media fragmentation and how certain kind of candidates have figured it out and figured out how to get attention in this world. It's one of the reasons why you see there's quite a few people who are former sports broadcasters who are running or getting elected. You have reality TV stars. You have I guess Mamdani is a former rapper, right? So you have these people who have they have a comfort with the camera. They have a comfort with constantly creating content and saying something interesting that gets reactions, because that is an outgrowth of the algorithm. So both Trump and Mamdani have that. And they also put out positions that maybe not everybody's going to agree with, but it gets reactions and it gets attention.
Mhm.
They're able to actually shape policy, shape. This is why I go back to don't hate the player, hate the game. This is what the game has been created, and the media fragmentation, which has happened from the algorithm, has created this situation. The thing to figure out, because this isn't going away, is how do you do that in a way that doesn't have a damaging effect on the country? And how do you get that attention? How can you do that and be interesting, get reactions from people, but not have it be something that tears people apart?
And I think that's hard because being, when I was running for reelection in a nonpartisan position, one of my kind of slogans were potholes are nonpartisan. And I talked about the entire coalition of folks that I had, from small business owners to major Democratic Party politicos to, the local Republican Party supporting. Now, as you're saying that, I'm realizing the algorithm didn't love that because it was so happy. It was not controversial. It was actually great,
Yeah.
but it made people enraged to see, oh, look at her. She has Republicans on that support her. She's a secret Republican, just like Nikki, right? And that did really well. And that narrative just pummeled that, oh, she doesn't really stand for anything if she stands for everything type thing,
Yeah.
which is frustrating because that, again, it goes back to what you and I are saying is how do you ensure that we're using media in a way to get good people elected that actually can make a difference and are not just releasing tweets and statements and saying the things that people want to hear in their echo chamber, but like not actually moving the needle on anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think Trump is somebody who's done, whether people agree with his policies or not, I generally agree with most of them, but um, he gets attention and he also gets a lot done. And part of that, you can tell that he knows that there's almost a correlation between you have to keep people's attention if you want to keep making forward progress. And he's unique. I mean, we're not going to see someone exactly like him. The closest thing I do agree is Mamdani is probably one of the closest people to that. And anybody who thinks he's not going to be able to go beyond mayor of New York City, maybe he's not. If the city falls apart, then maybe that matters. Maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I would caution anybody who wants to discount him. Now, I would have said the same thing about AOC a few years ago. I thought that she actually was a lot smarter than a lot of Republicans gave her credit for. I'm not 100% sure, and this is not digging at her at all. I have not seen the same level of skill from her the last few years as when she first came on the scene, which makes me wonder if some of what that was a really good staffer or consultant or somebody who kind of helped her get that attention early on. But a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this person is, she's a dunce, she's crazy, whatever. No, she was getting the algorithm to react. It was intentional, and it's why she defeated an incumbent. We'll set aside the algorithm and the issues there, but getting back to what good policy is. So when you come into the city government, I mean, there's my take on city government is it's usually a little bit less partisan, but maybe it's factions within partisan within the parties, but there's the issues you have to deal with. When you came into city council, what were like these are the 1, 2, 3 issues like these? This city needs to deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on public safety already, but the number one thing, of course, was homelessness. We had seen a increase post-COVID in terms of people downtown having negative altercations or interactions with fellow citizens. You were seeing them be repeat offenders in terms of petty crimes or theft. So that was number one, and I think that very much aligned with us having to make sure we were recruiting, retaining qualified officers as well. We needed an increased presence. So I'm really proud when I look back on the last 4 years. I used my public health background to really dig in and understand the landscape of homelessness in Columbia specifically. And a couple of things I want to mention: we're the capital city. We are the only city in the entire state that has what we call a low barrier shelter, which is no questions asked. If you need a place to stay and we have a bed, we'll let you in, even if that means you're addicted or you have priors, whatever. And I also learned a lot about the federal homelessness funding landscape, which was that our funding was to serve homeless people from Rock Hill to Abbeville.
Wow.
That's insane, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about, and that's the continuum of care program, and that has been around for years. And even, our local HUD office would say, yeah, we know it's not working, but no one wants to touch this because it does not, it's politically very unpopular to say you're going to cut funding or change funding around homelessness. I think after a while, and I don't think this was intentional, but it became very much I think, almost as if you were incentivized to keep people homeless because that's the only way that you get money to sustain the services you were providing. And so one of the things I recognized was there was no one really addressing what we would call like the hard to reach population. These are typically like your single older adults that either have a substance use or mental health problem, typically the ones that are engaging with law enforcement or having negative interactions. And so whatever we were going to do, I knew I wanted to focus on that particular population because we have plenty of great programs focused on families and youth, et cetera. So we launched Rapid Shelter, which is this tiny homes. And since I spearheaded that, we've housed over 150 people into permanent housing. They're constantly full. We have a place that's available anytime that, it goes under 40 degrees. And it's not the end all be all, but I do think that it helped also a lot of the provider community or the nonprofits that have been around a long time realize like we're not working together. We're all just getting our little piece of the pie and working on our little thing and not actually solving the problem. We're just keeping things kind of the same.
Yeah.
So that was very meaningful to be able to address in my time on council. And then, of course, just in general, I think there was this general sense that Columbia as a city government was not welcoming to development and not welcoming to small businesses, and it was really hard to interact with. And in some cases, I would agree. It goes back to what you and I talked about is there was this emphasis about what clique you were a part of or like the fact that you weren't from here. And so all of these neighboring areas were thriving and we were stagnant. And
Yeah.
so, modernizing our services was something that, as the millennial on council at the time, I was pretty passionate about. So we launched an app where you can actually report your pothole or your water leak, and you have a
Oh,
real
that's
person
cool.
respond that you can track. And that tells you, hey, this is something that is in the queue. Here's where it is. We also moved business licensing online so that you don't have to go between 9 and 5 to go pay your business license and take care of a lot of those things online. Launched Food Truck Fridays, which is now in Finley Park, which I'm very excited about. That has been going 3 years strong to let people that may not be able to afford the brick and mortar yet, but want to get their talent out there in terms of their food and get people engaging in some of our public spaces.
What did it take to get
So
that started? Like, is that around permitting, or I'm sure there's things like cutting some red tape to make that possible?
yes, so we had to go look at what our food truck policy even was. It
Mhm.
came from an idea around how when the state house is in session, there really aren't a ton of food options available to them unless you go and have a sit down restaurant on Main Street. And so, like many other cities, we don't allow food trucks in public spaces. It has to be in a private lot. And so, of course, the city had a lot of private lots that we could use. And one of those was the Bull Street district, which had been recently revitalized. So we started there. And the amount of foot traffic that started coming in the summertime, and I know even in Columbia, it is very hot. But the fact that you were able to,
Right? Isn't that
I was like, if this is going to work in the summer, it's going to work in the rest of the
yeah.
year. And it did. And so now, I was a part of the council that reopened Finley Park after over a decade. Now it's moved to Finley Park, which is city center, and allows people to kind of, again, connect between our entertainment districts and increase the quality of life. And so those were the things that I really loved solving. And one of my colleagues who I deeply, deeply respected, who unfortunately passed while he was in office, I'll never forget what he said to me when I would get frustrated about change. He would say, Aditi, solving problems is fun.
Hmm.
If you feel discouraged today, go to sleep. We're going to try again tomorrow. Don't think of it as something draining. It's something that's fun. And you are someone that wants to look at the root causes of things. And I think that all politics are local. And if you really do want to address the root cause of the problems, local government was definitely somewhere you can do that, despite everything that's happening on the national and state level.
That's excellent. So I asked for questions, suggestions for questions from previous guests, and one of my other favorite Southern Democrats, and also a fellow pollster and colleague. We work on things together sometimes. Is Carrie Cranford, who's
Yes.
based in South Carolina, and he said, to ask you about the best practices to bring back urban centers, bring them back alive. So this sounds like one area. But what would you say the best practices are for cities who want to do that?
So when I think of like the urban city center, first and foremost, you have to have connectivity and walkability. Think about our generation. One of the things I love about DC is I can get everywhere via my feet or the metro or the bus.
Yeah.
Things are very walkable. People want to be able to pick up their coffee and walk to work. Now, I think that we're headed in that direction, but most southern cities have always been catered around driving. But walkability is not going to come out of nowhere. You need revenue to do that, right? And that's where I feel like you have to make it easy to open a business and make it easy to bring a lot of different kind of ideas to life, which will then bring revenue for us to focus on things like infrastructure. And so I think that infrastructure has to be prioritized, and then alongside that, density. When we
Yeah.
talk about growth in South Carolina, typically statewide, people are thinking more in terms of like manufacturing or some of those kind of larger rural projects, or data centers are a hot topic right now. But in terms of cities, it has to be filling every parking lot and abandoned building and turning that into something that generates revenue. And for a capital city where you have the university and state government, that's especially important because you have so many buildings that are not on the tax roll. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing. And then alongside that, when you start having jobs that turn into careers, you start to see young families move back in. And most of us, again, we want to live downtown.
Yeah. What do you see as like the next stage for Columbia? Like, what could the future bring?
Well, I think when I would, as a data person, I would always want to look at comparable cities. And a comparable city to me is Austin or Raleigh.
Yeah.
I think that that is the next phase. I think that we bring in a large venue of some kind, concert venue or something. That would be really great to have, that we can then bring in even more revenue of shows and things. I think the convention center is a asset that we have to expand to allow for trade associations and people to come and visit Columbia for the first time, maybe being forced to because of their job, but then deciding to come back because they loved it so much. So I think the next phase is making sure that we have the amenities available for some of these larger tourist events to be able to come in to really put Columbia on the map. Um, because I think that it's sometimes very undiscovered or overshadowed by Greenville and Charleston. And I don't think that Greenville or Charleston are comparable cities at
Yeah,
all,
yeah,
because Charleston has the historic charm of being a port city,
yeah,
and then Greenville is in the mountains.
yeah.
So I always try to stop people when they are trying to compare us to them, because it's not comparable. We don't want to be them, but we can definitely be more.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see also the population of people downtown double in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years. And that's when you'll start to see a lot of these stores that people want, like the Apple Store or Nordstrom. They'll start actually looking at it seriously because we have the density and the income and the households to be able to handle it.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's something I'm curious about. Is you have this beautiful river, and is there more that can be done around that, or like what would be a possible?
Well, it's happening, and I'm not on council anymore, so I can't really talk about where it's progressed. But when I was on council, one of the things that we were doing is working on our William Street extension, which is a large plot of land, kind of city center, and turning that into a riverfront district. So that is hopefully in the works. And then, of course, alongside that, you have other municipalities neighboring Columbia that are expanding our riverfront so that you can eventually connect from the Lake Murray Dam all the way down to
Wow.
the USC baseball stadium, which is pretty great. And
Yeah.
so I think the interest and appetite is there. Much of what I learned in local government and in South Carolina politics is, for many years, people they just operate off of fiefdoms. Like they're like, this is my space, don't touch it type thing. And I think that that has kept a lot of growth from happening. And then, of course, there's always the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard, or a new term I heard was the caves, citizens against virtually everything. Oftentimes, our biggest deterrent to change
Mhm.
were the very people that have lived here their whole life
Yeah.
and maybe have benefited from the lack of growth.
Well, I will tell you from doing polling around the country, and it's true whether it's in. So I work with a fairly left wing group in Detroit, the People's Forum or something like that, and they are interested in development. And we've done polling, and it's not popular development. And then we've done stuff in Colorado Springs, which is very Republican, and it's almost exactly very different cities. The numbers are almost exactly the same, and I don't know if that's the case in Columbia, but that is something we've seen consistently across the country around development, which is unfortunate. I don't really know exactly why all of that is, but the people who also are the most vocal are the people who show up to your city council meetings, and that can have an even bigger distorting impact on local politicians, has been my experience. So one thing I'd like to talk a little bit about, and then give people an opportunity and how they can follow you, but talk a little bit about your healthcare policy background and what you think, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're running for a state legislature or city council, or maybe a statewide office. What should you be thinking about when it comes to healthcare policy?
Well, I think first and foremost, affordability. I mean, that's going to be on top of mind for everyone in the midterms, Democrat or Republican. I think that you're seeing, speaking of the algorithm, you're seeing like a general trend on TikTok and some of these social media sites saying it's cheaper for me to just pay out of pocket than to keep my health insurance because my premiums have gone up so much. Our
Mhm.
current system is not working, and it's going to require our Congress and our state legislatures to have a
Yep.
backbone and actually set some guardrails in place so that people aren't going bankrupt in terms of being able to get access to health. Or what you're having is, people offsetting the cost for others, and typically those are your middle class families. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is transparency in pricing, and I think this was something that President Trump had talked about in terms of wanting to have more drug transparency. I think that that's something that state governments should push as well, so that
Mhm.
people have a very clear idea of what they're paying for and why they're paying for it. And then, of course, alongside that, whether or not you agree with every aspect of Make America Healthy Again, that is currently the future of public health. And what we don't often see in media is some of the agreements that state governments have had with RFK Jr. on some of the things that he's done around, say, like food additives or, really calling out the junk food industry, for example. So I think that as there's a push to address some of those things, state legislatures should be paying attention to understand the ways in which they can increase healthy food access, make nutrition easier to understand, create environments where people that are on social benefit programs can get out of them, and be able to reduce obesity or some of the health concerns that they're seeing. So I think those are kind of the three top issues that I'm seeing kind of bubble up that everybody really should be paying attention to. And you don't have to be a healthcare expert. You can lean on experts to help provide you that insight. But if we don't focus on healthcare, what's going to happen is public health already has so much distrust from the handling of the pandemic.
Yeah.
You're going to start to see these like very disingenuous voices take over the algorithm and just fuel even more misinformation at the cost of American lives. And so I think it's really important for healthcare to be a part of everybody's.
Well, I mean, the dangerous side of it is Luigi Mangione. I mean, that's the dangerous side of the assassination of a health insurance executive. And that's the not dealing with stuff. As you went through that, when we talk about affordability and cost of living, there's really three areas. It's really healthcare, it's food, and it's energy. These are the things that really are cost drivers for most people. And if you can take a bite out of each of those, then that can have a big impact. And then housing, of course, that's the other one, which we haven't really had a chance to talk about, but that's another big one. With that, if we can bring up Aditi's Instagram and Substack. And so just any final thoughts do you have and how people can get in touch with you and what they should be looking for?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you all for listening. I think more conversations like this have to happen in order for us to move forward. And I think that Dustin and I are an example of the next generation that wants to see things get better, but also recognize that we're not going to agree on everything. And that doesn't mean we have to get super emotional about it. It means being pragmatic and figuring out something that we can do because we want our kids to succeed. We want them to be safe and we want them to live a good life. I'm not done yet. I don't know what's next, but in the meantime, because I'm somebody that really likes thinking critically and understanding the nuances of issues, definitely engage with me on Instagram or TikTok or my Substack. And I hope that this inspires you to stay engaged, whether you're in South Carolina or other parts of the country, especially locally, because I've always said that local is the incubator of ideas that often bubble up to state and national. And I hope that you also see that, the sensationalized tweet or video that's going viral is often not the full story of why campaigns turn out the way that they do. And really understanding all that goes into it is really important. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And safe travels. And thank you for visiting our nation's capital, but safe travels back to South Carolina. And it's been great having you on. And with that, on with the show. Well, I hope you got as much as I did out of that conversation with Aditi Bussells, and please do check her out on Instagram and her Substack. I actually recommend highly her article that she wrote on some of the unsexy issues that Democrats should focus on, and I highly recommend that for really anybody to take a look at. So please do check her out on at Aditi Bussells. And for those of you who are listening to this show, you may not know how to spell that. It's ADITI BUSSELLS, and that's on Instagram and Substack. So thank you very much to her. And if you like our program, if you'd like to help get us further and wider and help more people understand politics, pull back the curtain, see how things really work, please do like, follow, and subscribe. And one question I didn't think to ask her, but I'll follow up, is what she would ask our colleagues, fellow political strategists, about the future of the country and what they see happening in campaigns. And if you'd like to add your thoughts to it, or if you'd like to be part of any of our polling, or if you'd like to tell us what questions you'd like to see in maybe some of our Senate campaign polls that we're doing, go to pollingclub.com. That's a great way to get the inside scoop and see what's going on. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of people who like the prediction markets that want to have kind of an inside track as to what's happening in the race because they're making bets. Anyway, if you like to do that kind of stuff, it's a fun way to do it, and a little bit like sports betting. But anyway, thank you to everybody for being here today. Thank you to Aditi Bussells. Thank you for everybody who's willing to serve at the local level and cares about our country and is willing to stand up, be counted, and make a difference. And we appreciate all who do that. And have a great day.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.